Empress Vey stood at the tall window of her palace, looking out at the 3 moons that hung in the purple sky of her home world. She was the ruler of the Cathani Dominion, 12 star systems that answered to her command. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes burned like golden fire, and her mind held powers that could crush starships or read thoughts. Across entire planets, she was feared by her enemies and respected by her allies. But tonight she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. She felt curious about the human sleeping in the room behind her. His name was Ethan Cole. He had been her husband for 3 years now, ever since the peace treaty between the Cathani Dominion and the planet Earth. The treaty had required many things, but the most unusual requirement was a political marriage. Earth had offered one of their own to become the consort of the Empress, a symbol of the bond between 2 very different peoples. Vara had expected a soldier, she had expected a politician. She had expected someone who would try to use the marriage to gain power or influence. Instead, Earth had sent her Ethan, a 34-year-old former teacher from a small town in a place called Kansas. He had been selected through something the humans called a lottery, a random choosing. At least that was what they had told her. Ethan was not impressive. By Cathani standards, he had no psionic abilities. He could not move objects with his mind or sense emotions across great distances. He was physically weaker than even the lowest Cathroni servant. He was by all measures ordinary, and yet Viara found herself drawn to him. In the beginning she had kept her distance. She had duties to attend to, wars to prevent, and noble houses to manage. She gave Ethan his own wing of the palace and expected him to stay out of her way, but Ethan did not stay out of her way. He learned her language within 6 months, not just the formal version but the common speech that servants used. He learned the names of every palace worker, from the highest advisor to the lowest cleaner. He remembered birthdays and asked about sick family members and brought small gifts for no reason at all. The court nobles laughed at him behind his back. They called him the Empress's pet, the weak human who followed her around like a lost animal. At formal dinners, they would make jokes in the old tongue, thinking he could not understand. Ethan always smiled politely and pretended not to notice. Vara noticed, though. She noticed everything. What surprised her most was that Ethan never complained. He never asked her to defend his honor or punish those who mocked him. He simply continued being kind day after day, as if the cruelty of the court could not touch him. He worked in the imperial gardens, growing strange earth plants that he called tomatoes and peppers. He spent hours in the palace library reading about Cathani history and culture. He played games with the children of the servants, teaching them something called baseball that involved hitting a ball with a stick and running in circles. One night, about a year into their marriage, Viara had found him sitting alone on the balcony looking up at the stars. "Do you miss your home?" she had asked, surprising herself by starting a conversation. Ethan had looked at her with those calm brown eyes. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I miss the smell of rain on dry soil. I miss the sound of my students laughing. I miss my mother's cooking." He paused. "But I made a choice to come here, and I don't regret it." "Why did you agree to this?" Vary asked. "You could have refused. Earth would have chosen someone else." Ethan smiled, and There was something in that smile she could not quite read. Maybe I thought I could do some good here. Maybe I wanted an adventure, or maybe I just liked the idea of seeing the stars up close. It was a simple answer, and yet it stayed with her. As the years passed, Vara found herself spending more time with her human husband. She would tell him about the problems of ruling an empire, and he would listen without judgment. He did not offer brilliant solutions or clever political tricks. He just listened, and somehow that was enough. Sometimes he would tell her stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains, and cities filled with millions of people who had never seen another planet. He spoke of a world that had known terrible wars but had also created beautiful music and art and dreams of reaching the stars. Vara began to feel something she had not felt since she was a young princess before. The weight of the crown had hardened her heart. She began to feel affection, not the political kind that she showed to Elias, but something real and warm and slightly frightening. She also began to feel pity. Ethan was kind and good and gentle, but he was also limited. Humans lived such short lives compared to Kathrani, barely a century. If they were lucky, they had no natural powers, no psionic gifts, no way to defend themselves against the dangers of the galaxy. They were like children wandering through a forest full of predators, surviving only because the predators had not yet decided they were worth eating. The peace treaty protected Earth for now, but Vara knew that protection would not last forever. Other empires were already watching the human home world with hungry eyes. The Verax Collective saw them as potential slaves. The Midnight Council saw them as curiosities to be studied and dissected. Only the Cathai Dominion, down by marriage and treaty, stood between Earth and those who would devour it. And Ethan, poor sweet Ethan, had no idea how fragile his people truly were. Vara turned from the window and looked at her sleeping husband. His face was peaceful, a small smile on his lips as he dreamed of whatever humans dreamed about. She walked over and pulled the blanket up to his chin, a gesture of tenderness that would have shocked her cord if they had seen it. "I will protect you," she whispered, "you and your entire world. I promise." Ethan stirred slightly but did not wake. He simply mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over, completely unaware of the Empress watching over him. Vara smiled and returned to her window. She had no idea that she had it completely backward. She had no idea that the kind, gentle, ordinary human sleeping in her bed was the most dangerous being in the entire palace. She had no idea that Earth had not sent her a pet or a symbol or a sacrifice. Earth had sent her guardian, and very soon she would understand why the Festival of 3 Moons was the most important celebration. In the Kathrani calendar, it happened only once every 12 years, when all 3 moons aligned perfectly in the night sky. The entire empire celebrated with feasts and dances and displays of psionic power that lit up the darkness like fireworks. The imperial palace was filled with guests from across the 12 systems. Noble houses that usually hated each other pretended to be friends. For one night, ambassadors from distant empires came to pay their respects. Musicians played ancient songs while servants carried trays of exotic food and drink. Vara sat on her throne at the center of the great hall, dressed in robes of silver and black that marked her as the supreme ruler. Ethan sat beside her in a smaller chair, wearing simple but elegant clothes that he had chosen himself. He watched the festivities with genuine interest, clapping along to the music and complimenting the performers. Several nobles shot him looks of disgust, but he either did not notice or did not care. "You seem happy tonight," Vayara said to him during a quiet moment. "It reminds me of the county fair back home," Ethan replied, "except with more tentacles and glowing things." Vayara laughed before she could stop herself. A few nearby nobles stared in shock. They had never heard their empress laugh at anything. The night continued peacefully until the 10th hour, when everything changed. It started with the lights. Every lamp and torch in the great hall flickered and died at the same moment. Darkness swallowed the room, followed by screams of confusion. Vay immediately reached for her psionic powers, ready to create light and sense whatever threat was approaching. Nothing happened. She reached again, deeper this time, calling on abilities she had possessed since childhood. Still nothing. It was as if her powers had been cut away, leaving only emptiness where they had once burned bright. "Psionic dampeners," she whispered, recognizing the horrible feeling. These devices were rare and extremely illegal, capable of blocking mental powers within a certain range. Only a few organizations in the galaxy possessed such technology. Emergency lights flickered on, dim red things that barely pushed back the shadows. In that bloody light, they saw soldiers pouring into the great hall from every entrance. They wore black armor without markings, their faces hidden behind helmets. They moved with professional precision, cutting down the royal guards before they could even draw their weapons. Guests screamed and ran in all directions, trampling each other in their panic. Vara saw Lord Devin step forward from the mass of soldiers, his face twisted with triumph. He was one of the oldest nobles in the empire, leader of a house that had once ruled before her family took the throne. He had always smiled and bowed and spoken sweet words to her face, but she had known for years that he wanted her dead. "Empress!" Vayara Devin called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your reign ends tonight. The true bloodline will be restored." Vayara stood from her throne, refusing to show fear, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Without her powers, she was vulnerable in ways she had not been since she was a child, but she was still the Empress, and she would not die cowering. "You are a traitor, Devin," she said coldly. "Whatever happens tonight, your house will burn for this." Devin laughed. "Your house has no friends left, Farah. The other nobles are either with me or too afraid to stand against me. Your fleet is scattered across the empire, too far away to help. Your guards are dead. You have nothing." Vara felt Ethan move beside her. She grabbed his arm and pulled him behind her, placing her body between him and the approaching soldiers. "Stay behind me," she commanded. "I will protect you as long as I can." She expected him to be afraid. She expected him to tremble or cry or beg for mercy. That was what anyone would do in this situation, especially a powerless human facing hundreds of armed killers. But Ethan did not seem afraid at all. He looked at the soldiers with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was calm, almost peaceful, but underneath that calm was something else, something that reminded her of the deep ocean before a storm, when the water is still but full of terrible power waiting to be Released, Vara, he said softly, using her name without any title for the first time in their marriage. Thank you for protecting me all these years. Thank you for being kind to me when you did not have to be. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a political tool, Ethan. What are you talking about? Lyra asked, confused by his tone. D-Ven soldiers were getting closer. She could hear their boots on the stone floor. See the weapons in their hands. They would reach the throne in seconds. Ethan gently removed her hand from his arm and stepped forward, placing himself in front of her. She tried to pull him back, but he would not move. It was like trying to move a mountain. I made a promise before I came here, Ethan continued, still in that quiet voice. I promised that I would protect you with everything I have. I promised that if the day ever came when you needed me, I would be there. He looked back at her over his shoulder, and his brown eyes seemed to glow with a light she had never noticed before. That day has come. Ethan, you cannot fight them. You are only human. You have no powers. They will kill you. Ethan smiled, and it was the same warm smile she had grown to love over 3 years of marriage, but now she could see that there was something hidden behind that smile, something vast and ancient and absolutely terrifying. Only human, he repeated softly, as if the words amused him. Yes, that is what everyone believes. The psionic dampeners around the room began to spark and smoke. One by one they exploded into showers of metal and wire, but VR still could not feel her powers returning. Something was blocking them, something she could not understand. D-Ven shouted an order, and his soldiers raised their weapons. Plasma bolts screamed through the air toward Ethan and Vara, bright enough to burn through steel and strong enough to destroy battle tanks. Ethan raised one hand. The plasma bolts stopped. They hung in the air like frozen stars, their deadly light flickering but unable to move forward. Ethan looked at them with mild curiosity, as if they were interesting insects rather than weapons capable of ending his life. That's not possible, D-Ven whispered, his face going pale. Humans have no psionic abilities. Humans are powerless. Ethan turned to look at the noble, and now there was no warmth in his eyes at all. There was only something cold and vast and terribly, terribly patient. You are right about one thing, Ethan said. What I have is not psionic ability. He closed his hand into a fist, and the plasma bolts dissolved into nothing. It is something else entirely. The great hall fell silent. Even the screening guests stopped running, frozen in place by what they had just witnessed. Hundreds of eyes stared at the human standing before the throne, the same human they had mocked and pied for 3 years, the same human who had just done something that should have been impossible. Vara felt her legs grow weak. She had seen many strange things in her long life, but nothing had prepared her for this. Ethan, her gentle husband who grew tomatoes and played with children, had just stopped weapons that could destroy warships. He had done it with a wave of his hand, as if it was the easiest thing in the world. What are you? She whispered. Ethan did not turn around. His attention was focused on Lord D-Ven and the hundreds of soldiers who filled the hall. But his voice carried clearly in the silence. When Earth first made contact with the galaxy, he began speaking in a calm and steady tone. We learned something very quickly. We learned that we were small. We learned that we were weak. We learned that dozens of empires could crush us whenever they wanted, and there was nothing we could do to stop them. He took a step forward, and every soldier in the room took a step back. They did not know why they were afraid, but their bodies understood the danger, even if their minds did not. Your scientists studied us, Ethan continued. The Githani, the Verax, the Midnight Council, all of them, they looked at humans and saw nothing special. No psionic abilities, no natural weapons, no telepathy or telekinesis, or any of the gifts that other species take for granted. They decided that we were one of the weakest intelligent species ever discovered. Lord Divan had recovered some of his courage. He raised his hand, ordering his soldiers to spread out and surround Ethan from all sides. They obeyed, but their movements were slow and uncertain. You have one chance to surrender, human, Divan said, his voice only shaking a little. Whatever trick you used, it will not save you against 300 warriors. Ethan ignored him completely. What your scientists did not understand, he said, is that humans are different from every other species in one very important way. We are not specialists, we are adapters. While other species spent millions of years developing one specific ability, humans evolved to survive anything. We adapt. We learn, we change. The air around Ethan began to shimmer like heat rising from hot ground on a summer day. The temperature in the hall dropped several degrees and frost began to form on the nearest pillars. 50 years ago, Earth discovered something hidden in our genetic code, a potential that had been sleeping since the beginning of our species. We called it the awakening. It took decades of research and training to understand it, to control it. We created a secret program and selected the most gifted individuals from around the world. We trained them in facilities hidden deep underground, far from the eyes of alien observers. Viara listened with growing shock. She had studied humans extensively. Her empire had spies on Earth, scientists who monitored their progress. None of them had ever reported anything like this. You hid this from the entire galaxy, she said. For 50 years you pretended to be weak. Ethan finally turned to look at her. His eyes were still brown, still warm, but now they seemed to hold depth she had never noticed before. It was like looking at a still pond and suddenly realizing it was actually an ocean. We had to, he said. Simply, if the galaxy knew what humans could become, they would have destroyed us before we were ready. So we smiled and bowed and let everyone believe we were harmless. We signed treaties and sent diplomats and played the part of the innocent newcomers who needed protection. He turned back to face the soldiers, but we were never helpless. We were waiting, building our strength, preparing for the day when someone would threaten the things we cared about. Lord Divan had heard enough. He screamed in order, and all 300 soldiers attacked at once. Plasma bolts and energy blades and psionic attacks filled the air. Enough firepower to level a small city. The guests screamed and threw themselves to the ground, covering their heads. Ethan did not move. The attacks reached him and simply stopped. Plasma bolts froze and faded. Energy blades shattered like glass. Psionic strikes dissolved before they could touch him. He stood in the center of a storm of destruction, completely untouched, like a rock in the middle of a raging river. The Githani developed telekinesis, Ethan said, his voice somehow clear over the chaos. Vorax developed telepathy, the Midnight Council develops energy manipulation. Each species has one gift, maybe two if they are lucky. He raised both hands and the attack stopped completely. Every weapon in the hall froze, locked in place by an invisible force. Humans adapt to everything. We absorb, we evolve, we take what the universe throws at us and we make it part of ourselves. He brought his hands together and every weapon in the room crumbled into dust. 300 soldiers stood suddenly unarmed, staring at their empty hands in disbelief. That is what Project Prometheus taught us, Ethan said. That is what I have spent 20 years learning. To control, I do not have one ability. Lord Deven, I have all of them, every gift, every power, every trick that evolution has given to every species in the galaxy. I can learn them all. Vara finally understood. She understood why Earth had sent her this particular human. She understood why he had been so patient, so kind, so willing to be underestimated. He was not a victim. He was not a pawn. He was a weapon disguised as the most harmless thing imaginable, and he was her husband. Ethan, she breathed. All this time he looked at her, and for a moment he was just Ethan again, just a gentle man from Kansas who liked gardening and telling jokes and making her laugh when no one else could. All this time he said softly, I was waiting for a reason to reveal myself. Tonight you gave me that reason. He turned back to the soldiers and his expression hardened. You threatened my wife, he said, and his voice was no longer gentle at all. You threatened the woman I love. You broke into her home on the most sacred night of her calendar and tried to kill her. The frost on the pillars began to spread. The air grew so cold. The breath turned to fog. The soldiers tried to run, but their feet would not move. They tried to scream, but no sound came out. That, Ethan Cole said quietly, was a mistake. The soldiers of Lord Deven's rebellion were the finest warriors in the 12 systems. They had trained since childhood to fight and kill. They had won 100 battles and never known defeat. Each one of them was worth 10 ordinary fighters. And together, they formed an army that could conquer planets. Against Ethan Cole, they lasted less than 15 minutes. He moved through them like wind through tall grass. His movements were smooth and precise, almost gentle in their efficiency. He did not punch or kick or use any of the brutal techniques that soldiers relied on. He simply touched, and wherever he touched, soldiers fell. The first wave of 20 warriors charged him with energy. Blades drawn, Ethan stepped between them, his hands moving in small, careful motions. He pressed 2 fingers against one soldier's forehead, and the man collapsed into a deep sleep. He touched another soldier's chest, and her body went limp as if all her strength had been drained away. He moved through the group like a dancer, and when he emerged on the other side, all 20 lay unconscious on the floor. What are you doing to them? Vara called out, still standing by her throne. She wanted to help, wanted to fight, but her powers had not yet returned. All she could do was watch. I am putting them to sleep, Ethan replied, ducking under a sword swing and touching the attacker's neck. The soldier dropped instantly. Their minds will wake up in a few hours. They will have headaches, but no permanent damage. Why? Lord Deven screamed from behind his wall of guards. Why won't you kill them? They came here to murder your wife. Ethan paused for a moment, standing in a circle of fallen bodies. He looked at Devin with something that might have been pity, because they are just soldiers following orders. He said, most of them probably have families waiting for them at home, children who call them father, parents who worry about them. They made bad choices, but bad choices do not deserve death. He began moving again, and more soldiers fell. The nobles and guests who had been hiding around the edges of the hall watched with wide eyes. They had expected a massacre, but this was something different. This was a lesson. The human was showing them that he could kill everyone in the room if he wanted to, but he was choosing not to. He was choosing mercy somehow. That was more terrifying than brutality would have been. A group of elite guards surrounded Ethan, their armor glowing with psionic enhancements. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were Devin's personal protectors, each one capable of fighting a small army alone. They attacked together, moving in perfect coordination, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Ethan raised one hand and all of their armor went dark. The psionic enhancements that made them superhuman faded away, leaving them with only their normal strength. Before they could adjust, Ethan was among them. He moved too fast for eyes to follow, his hands finding pressure points and nerve clusters with perfect accuracy. In 3 seconds, all 6 elite guards lay on the ground, breathing steadily and forced sleep. Impossible, one of the watching nobles whispered. He is reading their minds. He knows exactly where to strike. Before they even move, Ethan heard the comment and smiled slightly. Not quite. He said, I am reading their muscles, their intentions, the electrical signals in their nerves. I know what they are going to do before they know it themselves. Lord Devin was backing toward the main door, his face twisted with fear and rage. His grand plan was falling apart around him. His army was being dismantled by a single human who was not even trying very hard. This is not over, Devin snarled. Even if you defeat my soldiers, the other noble houses will never accept a human having this much power. They will unite against you. They will burn Earth to ashes. Ethan stopped moving. He turned to face Devin directly, and the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. That would be unwise, he said quietly. Earth has been preparing for 50 years. We have been watching, learning, building our strength in secret. What you see in me is just one man, one graduate of one program. There are others, many others, and if anyone threatens our home world, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Devin pulled a ceremonial blade from his belt. It was an ancient weapon passed down through his family for generations. The blade was made from a metal that could cut through starship armor, and it was enhanced with enough psionic energy to kill even the strongest telepath. Then I will end this myself, Devin said, his voice shaking but determined. I am the head of the oldest noble house in the Empire. My ancestors ruled these stars before your species learned to make fire. I will not be defeated by a human. He charged at Ethan with all the speed and skill of a trained warrior. The blade moved in a perfect arc, aimed at Ethan's heart. Thought that Ethan caught the blade between 2 fingers. The metal screamed as it met his grip. Psionic energy crackled and died. The ancient weapon that had been designed to kill gods was stopped by 2 ordinary-looking human fingers. Your ancestors ruled because they were strong, Ethan said calmly, but strength is not just about power. It is about knowing when to use it and when to show mercy. He released the blade and it fell to the ground, cracked down the middle. Viora is a good ruler, Ethan continued, stepping closer to the trembling noble. She cares about her people. She works to make their lives better. She has spent her entire reign trying to bring peace and prosperity to this empire. You could have been part of that. You could have helped her build something beautiful. He placed one hand on Diven's shoulder and the noble's eyes went wide with terror. Instead, you chose this. A pulse of energy flowed from Ethan's hand. Diven's eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor as unconscious as all his soldiers. Ethan stood alone in the center of the great hall, surrounded by hundreds of sleeping bodies. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Cold faded from the air, the frost on the pillars began to melt. The terrible pressure that had filled the room disappeared, leaving only silence. He turned to look at Vara. She was still standing by her throne, her golden eyes wide, her blue skin pale with shock. She looked at the man she married, the man she had thought she knew, and realized that she had never truly seen him before. 11 minutes, she said softly. Ethan blinked. What, you defeated 300 elite soldiers in 11 minutes? Without killing a single one? Ethan shrugged, and suddenly he looked almost embarrassed. I did not want to hurt anyone more than necessary. They were just following orders. Vara stared at him for a long moment. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, she began to laugh. 3 days had passed since the festival of 3 moons, and the palace was still buzzing with activity. Guards were being questioned, nobles were being investigated, and messages were flying between star systems as word of what happened spread across the galaxy. The attempted rebellion had failed completely, and Lord Diven was now sitting in a prison cell waiting for his trial. But the rebellion was not the main topic of conversation. Everyone was talking about the human. Vara sat in her private garden, surrounded by the strange earth plants that Ethan had grown over the past 3 years. Tomatoes hung red and ripe from their vines, peppers of different colors dotted the green leaves. A small patch of something called strawberry spread across one corner, their sweet smell filling the air. Ethan knelt beside the strawberry patch, carefully removing weeds with his bare hands. He looked exactly like he always had, gentle and ordinary and completely harmless. If R had not seen what he could do with her own eyes, she would never have believed it. You could have told me, she said quietly. Ethan did not look up from his work. I wanted to every day. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? He finally sat back on his heels and met her eyes. Because Earth needed you to not know. If you had known what I was, you would have treated me differently. Other people would have noticed. Word would have spread, and our secret would have been discovered before we were ready. Vara nodded slowly. She understood the logic. Even if it hurt, so I was being tested. All this time, our marriage was just a mission for you. No, Ethan's voice was firm. The mission was to protect you. The marriage became real the moment I saw you stand up to that Varak's ambassador in our first year. You were so fierce, so determined to protect your people. I thought to myself, this is someone worth protecting. This is someone I could love. He stood up and walked over to her, his hands still dirty from the garden soil. He did not try to touch her, respecting the Distance she had placed between them. I am not a spy pretending to be your husband, he said softly. I am your husband who happens to also be very good at a secret job. Everything I showed you over the past 3 years was real. The gardening is real. The bad jokes are real. The way I feel about you is real. Viara studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. She found none. Whatever else Ethan Cole might be, he was telling the truth about this. The court is terrified of you now, she said. The nobles who used to mock you cannot even look in your direction. They bow when you enter a room. They flinch when you speak. I know, Ethan sighed. I did not want that. I liked being invisible. I liked being underestimated. It was peaceful. You cannot go back to being the quiet consort, not after what everyone saw. I know that too. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the garden. Somewhere in the distance, birds were singing, creatures that Ethan had brought from Earth to make this strange planet feel more like home. I have received 17 marriage proposals in the last 2 days, Raya said suddenly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. For yourself? For you? Other empresses and queens and rulers want to claim you for themselves. They are offering vast sums, entire planets, anything to have a human like you in their court, despite everything. Ethan laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that made Vara's heart ache with a mixture of joy and confusion. And what did you tell them? He asked. I told them that my husband is not for sale. She paused. I also implied that anyone who tried to take you would regret it very deeply, using my own threat level to protect me. Clever. I learned from watching you. They shared a small smile, and some of the tension between them began to fade. The other noble houses are falling in line, Vara continued. The ones who supported Divan are begging for mercy. The ones who stayed neutral are suddenly very eager to prove their loyalty. My position has never been stronger. Good. You deserve stability. It is not because of me. It is because of you. They are not afraid of me anymore. They are afraid of what stands beside me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Is that a problem? Viara considered the question carefully. It should be. An empress should rule through her own strength, not through the strength of others. But she hesitated. But I am tired of standing alone. I am tired of having to prove myself every single day to people who want to see me fail. If having you beside me makes them think twice before plotting against us, then perhaps that is not such a bad thing. Partners, Ethan said, not protector and protected partners. Yes. Vara finally reached out and took his dirt-covered hand in her own partner's. News of what happened at the Festival of Three Moons spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Every empire, every council, every hidden power in the universe heard about the human who had defeated 300 soldiers without killing anyone. They heard about abilities that should have been impossible, about powers that did not fit into any known category, and they heard the quiet warning underneath the story. Earth was not what they had thought. Humans were not the helpless children they had appeared to be. For 50 years they had been hiding, growing, preparing. The galaxy had looked at humanity and seen prey. Now they were beginning to understand that they had been looking at something else entirely. The Verax Collective canceled their plans to claim human territory. The Midnight Council withdrew their research teams from Earth orbit. even the great empires that had considered humans beneath notice began to send diplomats and gifts and offers of friendship. It was amazing how quickly things changed when people realized they had made a terrible mistake. In her palace surrounded by earth plants and alien moons, Empress Viara worked on the business of ruling an empire, and beside her, just as he had always been, sat Ethan Cole. He still smiled his gentle smile, he still told his bad jokes, he still spent his mornings in the garden and his evenings reading in the library. But now when he walked through the halls, people bowed. When he spoke, people listened. When he looked at someone, they remembered that the kindest man in the palace was also the most dangerous being in the 12 systems. Do you miss it? Vara asked him one evening as they sat together watching the 3 moons rise, being invisible. Ethan thought about it for a while. Sometimes, he admitted, but I think I like this better. Why? He turned to look at her, and his eyes were warm with the love he had hidden for 3 long years. Because now I do not have to pretend anymore. I can just be myself, all of myself with you. Viara leaned against his shoulder, and together they watched the moons climb into the purple sky. Some powers are best kept hidden until they are needed, but other powers, the most important ones, are best shared with someone you love. And in the heart of an alien empire, a human from Kansas and an empress from the stars began to write a new story together.